I wasn't planning on staying in Pennsylvania. The bus I'd been on broke down outside of a town I hadn't even heard of before Hollow Pines. A couple of people groaned, a few called family. But me? I just kept walking. I've been drifting for a while now, not really tied to anywhere. When you live like that, you get good at spotting two things: cheap food and a place that's hiring. That's how I ended up at the Hollow Pines Diner. From the outside, it looked like something out of the 1,960 seconds that no one had bothered to update. A squat, low building, all chrome siding dulled by rain and rust. Neon sign buzzing just enough to make you wonder if the sound was in your ears or in your head. The windows were tinted with grease and cigarette smoke that no mop or rag was ever going to clear. But it had a help wanted sign taped to the door. Night shift cook. That was enough for me. The manager, Miss Keller, was in her 50s, though she looked older. Thin, wiry, with deep lines etched into her face, like somebody had carved them there with a blade instead of time. She had a tired voice, the kind that carried both warning and welcome in the same breath. "You want steady pay? You'll get it here," she told me, not even bothering to ask my last name. "But if you're working nights, you follow the rules." I thought she meant closing duties or how to mop the floor. Instead, she slid a laminated sheet across the counter like it was sacred. The rules were short, too strange. Never let a customer sit in booth #6. If the jukebox starts playing on its own, unplug it immediately. The man at the counter after 2 a.m. is not real. Do not serve him. Always keep the pie case full. If it empties, refill it, even if no one orders pie. Never go outside between 3:13 and 3:17. If a stranger asks, "How far to Hollow Pines?" lie. I stared at the sheet, then at her. "You serious?" Her face didn't change, not even a twitch. Dead serious. Those rules keep this place open. They keep you alive. I laughed, because what else do you do? A town in the middle of nowhere, a diner frozen in time, and a list of rules that read like campfire ghost stories. But Keller didn't laugh with me. She just set her jaw and tapped the sheet. "Don't treat them like a joke. You'll see why soon enough." I pocketed the laminated rules, figuring it was just one of those local traditions like scaring off outsiders. But that first night, I learned they weren't jokes. The shift started quietly. A pair of truckers came in, nodding to each other without saying much. A family passing through ordered fries and left fast, the kids whining about being tired. By midnight, the place was dead. That kind of dead, where even the hum of the lights feels too loud. I leaned against the counter, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, and wondered if maybe I'd made a mistake taking the job. At 1:42 a.m., I heard it. The jukebox. No one had touched it all night, but suddenly, it flickered to life. The neon around the edges lit up, casting a sickly glow across the diner. And then, music. A slow, crackling tune. An old country ballad that sounded like it had been recorded underwater. The voices warped, dragging syllables longer than they should be. My stomach dropped. I thought of the rules. If the jukebox starts playing on its own, unplug it immediately. I hesitated, because, come on, it's just a machine. Old wiring maybe. Static. A glitch. That's what I told myself as the song played on, getting louder, clearer. I stood, walked over, and yanked the plug from the wall. Sparks popped. The lights on the jukebox died. But the music kept going. For 15 seconds, maybe more, it kept playing. Louder now. And under the twang of the guitar, I could swear I heard whispers. My name. Over and over. When it finally cut out, the diner fell back into silence, so complete it rang in my ears. That was my first night. My first test. And it was the first time I didn't laugh at the rules. My second shift started with rain. Not the kind that cools the air, but the kind that soaks into everything. Sidewalks, your clothes, even the smell of the diner. The neon sign outside buzzed like it was choking on the damp air. Inside, the heat from the grill fogged the windows, blurring out the empty highway. At first it was quiet, just me and the hiss of frying oil. Keller had left early, muttering something about paperwork, leaving me alone to handle the graveyard hours. I didn't mind. I'd worked worse jobs, and the silence was starting to feel almost comfortable. Almost, because booth #6 kept drawing my eyes. It sat in the far corner, under a flickering light. The red vinyl seats were cracked open like old skin, the stuffing pushing out in tufts. It didn't look any different from the other booths, but I couldn't shake the memory of the rule. Never let a customer sit in booth #6. It sounded ridiculous until the bell over the door jingled. A man walked in, drenched. His suit clung to him like wet paper, dark hair plastered against his skull. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a storm, even though the rain hadn't been that heavy. Water dripped from his cuffs and pooled on the floor as he moved. He didn't glance at the menu board, didn't look around. He went straight for booth #6. "Evening," I tried, voice wavering. "Anywhere else you'd like to sit?" He slid into booth #6 like he hadn't heard me. The wet squeak of vinyl made my stomach twist. "Sorry, sir, that booth's, out of order." I didn't know what else to say. The man turned his head slowly, too slowly, like his neck was stiff. His smile stretched wider than it should have. His teeth were the wrong shade, too dark, too wet. "That booth," he said. His voice was low, vibrating, almost metallic. "Is mine." The lights overhead flickered. The smell hit next, sour, rotten, like old meat left in the sun. I gagged and took a step back, gripping the counter for balance. "You'll need to move, sir," I stammered. "It's not safe." His grin stretched further, his lips splitting at the corners. Safe for who? My knees almost buckled. My heart pounded so loud I barely heard the bell above the diner door when it jingled again. 2 truckers walked in, boots thudding, voices carrying. "Smells like hell in here," one muttered. I whipped my head back to booth #6. Empty. The man was gone. Not a drip of water, not a crease in the vinyl, just emptiness. The truckers ordered coffee, chatting about their route, unaware that my hands were shaking as I poured it. I kept glancing back at booth #6, expecting him to reappear, but it stayed empty the rest of the night. When the shift ended, Keller was waiting by the register. She studied my face, the way my hands trembled, and sighed like she already knew. "You saw him." "Yeah," I whispered. "Sat in booth #6. Said it was his." Her jaw tightened. "We lost people to that booth. They sit down, and they don't get up again. The seat doesn't let them go." "What happens to them?" I asked. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. You keep them out, or you'll end up joining them." Her eyes locked on mine, hard and heavy. "Don't let anyone sit there, ever." That night, when I finally crawled into the narrow bed at the cheap motel down the road, I dreamed of booth #6. I dreamed the cushions rose and fell like lungs. I dreamed of the wet man's grin stretching across the red vinyl. And I dreamed of sinking into the booth myself, the seat pulling me down, my body dissolving into the stuffing while my mouth opened in a scream no one could hear. When I woke, sweat slicked my skin. The clock said 6:06 a.m. I stared at the ceiling and whispered the rule to myself. Never let a customer sit in booth #6. I wasn't laughing anymore. By my 3rd night, I had stopped treating the rules like folklore. They weren't a joke anymore. Not after booth #6. Still, there's a difference between knowing the rules matter and living with them. Every time I glanced at the laminated sheet taped behind the counter, it was like a reminder that I was balancing on a tightrope over something I couldn't see. The shift started quiet. Too quiet. No travelers, no truckers, not even a single local. Just me, the smell of fried grease clinging to my clothes, and the buzz of the neon outside. I tried to distract myself by wiping the counter and reorganizing condiments, but the silence had weight to it. That's when I heard the faint click. The jukebox. The machine sat in the far corner near the window, a hulking relic from the 1,950 seconds. No one had touched it all week. Its chrome sides were dented, its glass scratched. The list of songs so faded most titles were unreadable. And yet, the neon around the jukebox blinked awake, casting the booth in that sickly pink-blue glow. A song started to play. The guitar twanged, slow and sad, like something out of a country funeral. The singer's voice crackled through static, dragging vowels into long, distorted sounds. My heart hammered. The rule came back sharp in my head. If the jukebox starts playing on its own, unplug it immediately. I forced myself to move, crossing the diner fast, shoes squeaking on the greasy tile. My hands shook as I grabbed the cord and yanked it from the wall. Sparks hissed. The neon lights died, but the music kept playing. I froze, staring. The jukebox was dead, unplugged, and still the music poured out, louder now, clearer. Underneath the melody, I heard something else. Whispers. Faint at first, then sharper. They were saying my name, over and over. Dozens of voices, layering on top of each other, dragging the syllables like claws across my brain. I slapped my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside me. It was in my head, crawling down my spine. For 15 endless seconds, it kept going. Then, as suddenly as it started, the music stopped. The silence was worse. I didn't touch the jukebox again that night, but I couldn't take my eyes off it either. Every time I passed by, I swore I saw the song list change. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was just tired. But when I looked closer, I saw it. Track 66. The End of You. I blinked, heart pounding. That title wasn't there before. The paper inside looked warped, water-stained, like the letters had been written fresh in ink that bled through. I grabbed a piece of tape from the counter and covered it. My hands shook the whole time. The next morning, Keller came in early. She saw the tape over the jukebox and just nodded. "You acted fast," she said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes were relieved. "What would have happened if I hadn't?" I asked. She paused, staring at the dead machine. Then she whispered, "Then you wouldn't be standing here asking me." I tried to sleep later that day, but the song kept circling in my head, broken and warped. I couldn't remember the lyrics, only the way the voices bent my name into something sharp, something wrong. For the first time, I wondered if the jukebox had been playing just for me, and I realized something that made my skin crawl. The jukebox was waiting. By the fourth night, the diner felt less like a place of work and more like a stage where something unseen waited for its cue. I'd gotten used to the silence, used to my own footsteps echoing in the tiled kitchen, used to checking booth #6 out of the corner of my eye. But no amount of getting used to it could prepare me for what happened that night. It started just after 2 in the morning. The bell over the door didn't ring. That was the first thing I noticed. One moment the counter was empty. The next, he was there. A man or something that wore the shape of one sitting on the red stool closest to the register. He was tall, gaunt, his shoulders hunched forward beneath a tattered gray coat that looked as though it had been soaked through 100 storms and never dried. His skin was pale, stretched too tight, and his eyes were clouded white, like glass marbles filmed over with milk. They didn't blink, they didn't move. They just stared ahead, fixed on something I couldn't see. The rule came back sharp in my head. The man at the counter after 2 a.m. is not real. Do not serve him. My hand tightened around the coffee pot I'd been holding. Every instinct screamed to ask him what he wanted, but I kept my lips pressed shut. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Just sat there, breathing shallowly, faint rattles like something old and rusted turning in his chest. The door jingled again, this time for real. A young woman came in, probably early 20s, backpack slung over her shoulder, looking road-weary. She smiled faintly at me. "Coffee, please." I poured her a cup, grateful for something normal, and slid it over. But her gaze drifted down the counter. "Is he okay?" she asked, nodding toward the gray-coated figure. My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth to stop her, to warn her, but the words tangled in my throat. She stepped closer to him. "Sir, are you all right?" That's when the lights cut out. The diner was plunged into pitch black. The coffee pot slipped from my hands and shattered against the floor, but I barely heard it over the sound that filled the darkness. The metallic clatter of utensils hitting tile, the woman's gasp, and then silence so heavy it crushed the air from my lungs. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For 30 seconds, maybe more, I stood frozen in that suffocating dark, my ears strained for anything, a breath, a footstep, anything. And then, just as suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The stool beside the man was empty. The woman was gone. No coffee cup, no backpack, no trace she'd ever been there at all. But the man at the counter was still there. His lips had curled into the faintest smile. I stared at him, throat burning. "What do you want from me?" I whispered before I could stop myself. His head turned, just slightly, too stiff, too slow. His eyes never quite focused, but his smile deepened, stretching the pale skin of his face until it threatened to split. At 2:29, he was gone. Not like he stood up and left. Just gone. The stool empty, the air still. When Keller came in that morning, I told her everything. She just shook her head. "You should have stopped her." "I tried," I whispered. "I couldn't. She's gone now." Keller said flatly. Her eyes were rimmed red, like she hadn't slept in days. You keep your mouth shut around him. Don't talk. Don't serve. Don't acknowledge. Not even once. Her voice cracked then, low and bitter. The ones who do never get to clock out again. I wanted to ask what happened to them, where they went, but I didn't. Some questions weren't safe to ask. That night, when I finally collapsed into bed, my dreams were filled with the counterstool. I dreamed of the man's milky eyes following me no matter where I moved, and I dreamed of the young woman's voice, calling faintly from somewhere far away. Coffee, please, over and over, until the sound warped into laughter that wasn't hers. By the 5th night, I was already worn thin. My nerves twitched at every sound, the buzz of the neon sign outside, the creak of the walk-in fridge, the occasional whine of wind squeezing under the door. I thought maybe I'd started to adapt, that maybe if I just followed the rules, kept my head down, I could survive. But that night taught me how fragile the balance really was. It started with something so small I almost didn't notice. The pie case. It sat at the far end of the counter, glass fogged with fingerprints, shelves lined with slices no one ever seemed to order. Apple, cherry, pecan flavors that never disappeared no matter how many nights passed. I'd restock it out of habit, not really thinking about it. The rule had always bothered me. Always keep the pie case full. If it empties, refill it, even if no one orders pie. Why did it matter? Who even cared? That night, I found out. It was around 3 a.m. when I realized the case was empty. The delivery truck that usually dropped off the frozen pies had run late. Keller wasn't around, and I hadn't thought much of it. But when I walked past the glass, I froze. Every shelf inside was bare. Not even a crumb. That's when the lights began to hum. Not just a soft electric buzz, this was loud. Almost like the fluorescent bulbs were straining to hold back a scream. The sound made my teeth ache, and then I noticed the shadows. In the booths along the windows, the darkness began to change. At first, it was subtle, the kind of trick your eyes play when you've been awake too long. But then it got worse. The shadows started spilling out, stretching across the tile like spilled ink. They slid down from the tables, creeping toward the middle of the floor, pooling together. The bell above the door jingled once. The air shifted like someone had entered, but the door never opened. Then the whispers began, low, guttural. Dozens of voices layered on top of one another, rising from every corner of the diner. Feed us. Over and over. Each time louder, each time closer. My body moved before my brain did. I bolted into the kitchen, yanking open the freezer. Pies, still in their boxes, stacked unevenly. I grabbed as many as I could, my hands slipping against the frost. The whispers followed me back out. The shadows had crept halfway across the floor, thick and wet-looking. I stumbled to the case, fumbling to unwrap the pies, slamming slices onto the shelves. Apple, cherry, blueberry. My hands shook so badly the glass fogged with my breath as I shoved them in. As soon as the last slice hit the shelf, the whispers stopped. The shadows froze. Then, slowly, they seeped back into their corners, folding themselves into nothing. The hum of the lights softened, fading back into the regular buzz. The diner looked normal again, but the smell lingered sweet at first, then sour, like fruit left too long in the sun. When Keller came in at dawn, she saw the pies crooked in the case, my hands still shaking. You let it empty. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, resigned. I fixed it, I said. You almost didn't. She slid an extra key across the counter. Keep the freezer stocked. Always. If the shelves are bare again, you won't get another chance. I wanted to ask what exactly would have happened if I hadn't filled it. But the answer was in the whispers still rattling in my ears. That night, when I finally collapsed into bed, I dreamed of the booths filled with shadowy figures, mouths gaping wide, chanting in unison, "Feed us." The laminated sheet had always felt like a chain around my neck, but there was one rule that gnawed at me harder than the rest. Never go outside between 3:13 and 3:17. It was the only one that gave a specific time. Why those 4 minutes? Why not before or after? The others made a kind of strange sense. The jukebox, booth #6, the pie case. They had their own logic. But this one felt like bait for curiosity. And eventually, I bit. That night, The diner was empty. No truckers, no families, not even a single car on the highway. The silence pressed against the windows like a weight. I checked the clock above the register. 3:12 a.m. My pulse picked up. I told myself I was just going to test it, just going to step outside for 1 minute, prove to myself that Keller was exaggerating, and then I'd come back in and laugh at how paranoid I'd become. When the second hand clicked to 3:13, I unlocked the door and stepped out. The air hit me first. It wasn't just still, it was wrong. The kind of silence that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. No wind, no bugs, not even the hum of the neon sign. I turned toward the highway, and my stomach lurched. The road didn't stretch into the forest anymore. It ended. Just ended. 20 feet from the diner, the asphalt crumbled into nothing, and beyond it was a black abyss. No stars, no horizon, just emptiness that seemed to pull at the edges of my vision. Figures stood along the edge. Tall, thin, humanoid, but too elongated, their arms brushing the ground. They didn't move. They didn't have faces. They just watched. I took a step back, my breath ragged. My skin prickled like ants were crawling under it. Then the bell above the diner door rang. I whipped around. The door was shut, locked, but the bell jingled again, frantic, like someone was opening it over and over from the inside. My chest tightened. The figures at the edge shifted not closer, not further, but aware. Their heads turned in unison, tilting toward me like I was a sound they just heard. I bolted. I slammed back inside, twisting the lock so hard the metal groaned. My heart thundered in my ears. I didn't breathe until the clock hit 3:18. Keller showed up later that morning, and the moment she saw me, her face hardened. "You went out." I didn't answer. I couldn't. She stepped closer, her voice sharp but trembling underneath. "That's when the walls are thin. You give them a second of your attention, they'll take more than that." I swallowed hard. "What happens if you don't make it back in time?" Her eyes flicked to the window, to the stretch of highway that was back to normal now. "Then you don't make it back at all." That day, I didn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the figures at the edge of the void, faceless heads tilting toward me, waiting. And worse, I knew they had seen me too. You can feel when a night has teeth. It starts normal, then some small seam splits like a bulb buzzing one note too high, or the clock lagging a second behind itself, and suddenly you're holding your breath without realizing it. That night began with coffee and quiet, and ended with me learning how a question can be a trap. By 11, the last regular had paid and left. The storm from earlier had blown itself out, leaving the windows freckled and the road smeared with reflections. I topped off the pie case, wiped the counter until it squeaked, and told myself the worst was behind me. I said the rules under my breath, like a nervous habit. Never let a customer sit in booth #6. If the jukebox starts on its own, unplug it. The man at the counter after 2 a.m. isn't real. Do not serve him. Keep the pie case full. Never go outside. 333-3317. If a stranger asks, "How far to Hollow Pines?" lie. I had never heard anyone say those words out loud. I didn't know why we were supposed to lie. All I knew was that Keller's voice had been flat when she handed me the laminated list. Don't answer truth for that one. I told myself it would never come up. Who asks that exact phrase? In a world full of ways to get directions, who chooses a sentence like that? 1:15, the bell over the door jingled. He looked like the sort of man a diner attracts. Flannel jacket, jeans wet at the cuffs, backpack slung high. Early 30s, maybe. A face that would be handsome if it weren't so tired. He took in the room with a slow sweep, as if he was measuring it, then headed for the counter. He didn't even glance toward booth #6. I let my shoulders loosen a little. "Coffee?" I asked. He smiled without showing teeth and nodded. His hands were steady on the mug. That's the sort of pointless detail my brain saves when it needs to pretend a thing is normal. His hands didn't shake. He ordered eggs and toast. Nothing weird about the way he spoke. He didn't stare at the jukebox. He didn't make the lights flicker. He just ate, calm, polite, though there was a distance to him, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I've seen people like that before. Long-haul drivers sitting with ghosts, or kids coming home from nowhere. They keep their eyes on a place inside themselves, not on the room. He finished the eggs, pushed the plate away with a small, neat gesture, and then he looked up at me as if he was asking for the time. "How far to Hollow Pines?" The question was nothing. Soft, casual. But the skin on my arms lit up like static. A hiss went through the fluorescent tubes, very faint, like someone clearing their throat. The rule stepped forward in my head. Not advice, not a folktale, a command. If a stranger asks, "How far to Hollow Pines?" lie. "Couple hours west," I said, and it was almost easy. I made a little face, "The roads are confusing out here" face, and wiped an imaginary spill from the counter like a man thinking about things other than lies. For a beat, nothing. Then he tilted his head, too slow, too exact, like he had to remember how to move through the world's physics. His eyes were wrong. Not at first. At first they were the right color, the right wetness, the right size. But the pupils didn't swell with the light's tiny flickers. They held like ink spilled on glass. "Couple hours west," he repeated. He tasted each word. "All right." He dug in the pocket of his flannel and came up with a handful of coins. Not a roll of bills, not a card. Coins. He set them on the counter with care. Their surfaces caught the light like wet stones from a creek. They were cold when I swept them into my palm. Not diner AC cold, deep cold, winter inside metal. My fingers flinched without thinking. "Keep the change," he said, and almost smiled. It was the second time he had offered a shape of a smile without teeth. He stood. He didn't ask for a receipt. He didn't ask which road to take, though the question should have led to that. He lifted his backpack like it weighed nothing and left without disturbing the bell over the door. It jangled anyway, a second too late. I poured the coins into the register because that's what you do with money. The drawer slid open. The little ding tried to be cheerful. I closed it, swallowed the taste of old metal, and breathed. I told myself I had done well. I had followed the rule. I had lied when the world wanted truth. 5 minutes later, I opened the drawer again to give change to a trucker who wanted to pay cash. The coins were gone, not swapped for other coins, not fallen through a crack. Gone, in their place. 8 small shapes, off-white, smooth, each a little different. I reached with 2 fingers and knew what they were before I let myself know. Teeth. Human. Molar, canine, premolar. Whoever had arranged them had taken care to leave a curve of grin there. A dental arc buried under the till. My stomach went light. I slid the drawer shut too hard and the coin slots rattled like they'd been startled. The trucker took his coffee to go and didn't ask about my face. Some people out here know how to ignore other people's terror. It's a skill you acquire like buttoning with gloves on. I told myself I would deal with the register later. I cleaned, I checked the pie case, I restocked napkins. Little work that holds a mind inside a fence. At 1:10, lights from the highway smeared across the windows, bending like a line drawn underwater. I looked up. The road did not do that. The highway outside is a simple straight, disappearing into the black cut of trees like a taut string. But as the headlights moved, they doubled and tripled, looping as if turning a corner that wasn't there. The red tail lights of a car did a lazy figure 8 and then blinked out entirely, though I hadn't heard an engine stop. I stepped closer to the glass. The trees were wrong. Not taller, not nearer. Repeated. A stand of pines, a gap. A stand of pines, a gap. But the gaps were the same, each a copy. My reflection lay faint over the outside. My face, my hand raised to touch the pane. Behind my reflection, farther back than the road, a man-shaped shadow stood with his head tilted just slightly to the side, like he was hearing the answer to a question I hadn't asked. I pulled the blinds. Nothing crawled under the door. No song started up. "It's fine," I told the coffee machine as if the machine needed calm, not me. I wiped down the counter again. The rag rasped. My skin kept remembering the coins cold. At 1:58, the bell offered a half-hearted jingle. The door didn't move. The jingle continued. 2 notes, then a third, like the bell was trying to ring a pattern it had been taught by someone with no fingers. I didn't go to it. I have learned about doors. At 2:03, the stool at the end of the counter depressed as if occupied. Not the one closest to me, the 4th. His stool is the closest when he comes. I pretended not to see it shape my night. I kept my eyes on the coffee as if brewing were delicate work that required a man's whole attention. At 2:29, a car slowed outside. The engine held its voice at idle like it had been told to wait. After a moment, the horn tapped twice. Not a "hey, I'm here." A test. The sound leaked around the edges of the blinds, thin. I didn't move. The horn tried again, shrugging. At 2:32, a woman's voice called, muffled by glass. "Hello?" That almost got me. My hand lifted before I reminded it whose hand it was. The laminated sheet on the wall behind the register looked like a cheap talisman and worked like a good one. At 2:41, the lights dimmed 2 ticks. Usually, this meant what it means: the man at the counter. But when I lifted my eyes in a tiny act of disobedience, the stool nearest me stayed empty. He wasn't here. That was worse. Rules you can hold. Chaos looks like choice until it isn't. I tried to measure time in small acts. Refill sugar, refill ketchup, set the pie triangles right, check the napkins. It carried me to 3-2 with only one little crack, the jukebox twitching its neon for a heartbeat, then going still like a child who wants attention and doesn't get it. I said to the empty room, I lied. Saying it out loud might as well have been a confession to a priest or a dare to a trap. You told me to lie. I did. The clock. 3:11 now. I was thinking about the forbidden minutes. The door and the abyss. The figures at the edge. I pulled my eyes away from the clock. That's when the man came back. He didn't open the door. He didn't touch the bell. He was just sitting at a booth that wasn't booth #6, which is maybe the most frightening part, seeing the rules play with themselves. He had no food. He had no coffee. He had his backpack beside him and his hands folded like a student waiting for class to begin. He waited until I came close to wipe a nothing ring of nothing from the table. Which way? He asked. To Hollow Pines. Not the exact phrasing from before. Not the sentence Keller had printed in cheap ink. I felt the trap and the absurdity in the same breath. It's a different question, some silly part of me argued. The rule is exact. Another part of me remembered how the jukebox had played with no power, and how the road had bent into a loop. How far? He'd said before. Which way? Now. I looked down at his hands. The nails were clean. The knuckles had that faint sheen of chapped skin that winter gives. His palms were lined. A real man's palms. West, I said lightly, and you'll see it before you know it. The lie tasted less like a lie this time, and more like reciting a word that belongs to someone else. He didn't smile at all now. He opened his mouth in a calm shape and showed me the teeth I hadn't seen. They were fine, regular, not too white, not too straight, human. The relief I felt at their normalcy was so stupid it almost made me laugh. He nodded once. The kind of nod you give a sermon when you don't agree, but the preacher has earned the nod by talking for an hour. He stood. He left the booth as neat as he'd found it. He reached into his pocket and placed one coin on the table. Keep the change, he said again, though I hadn't given him a bill. Then he left in that same way. The door's bell late by a beat. The air slower to seal where he'd walked. I picked up the coin. It wasn't U. S. Mint. It wasn't any mint, I know. The face wasn't a face. It was a profile, with the features softened into a suggestion. Eye, nose, mouth, but all in the wrong proportions, as if the die maker had been describing a human from memory. Around the edge, not letters, marks, as regular as letters, but no alphabet I could read. The coin's cold sank into my fingers and climbed my wrist. I put it in the register. I knew what would happen. I did it anyway because leaving it anywhere else felt like giving it a place in the room. At 3:06, the highway outside did another impossible bend. Headlights came from the east and then, without a turn, reappeared from the west. I watched the double pass as if a merry-go-round had been constructed out there in the dark and lit with other people's travel. At 3:12, I stood at the door and pressed my palm to the glass. I wanted so badly to leave, to check if the edge of the world waited for me again, if the figures would tilt their heads in that patient way. Curiosity is teeth with sugar on them. The clock's second hand shifted into 3:13, and I stepped back from the door like it had hissed. The bell jingled on its own, urgent. The air cooled. Down the highway, the lights slowed and began to circle the lot as if the road were tightening around us. I went behind the counter and leaned on the register, as if my weight could teach the room patience. I opened the drawer because fear doesn't always choose smart movements. The coin lay where I'd put it, staring its wrong profile up at me, heavier than it should have been. Beside it, another tooth. This one, with a faint hairline crack I could fit my fingernail into. It hadn't been there before. Okay, I said to the empty diner, and I do not know who I was answering. Okay. At 3:17, the shiver in the bell stopped. The air loosened its grip. The headlights finished whatever circuit a rig can't do and disappeared toward the tree line, which went back to being a line and not a loop. I stayed awake until sunrise, because people who've watched the dark practice tricks are slow to trust morning. When Keller came in, I tried to explain the lie's shape. She listened like a judge. He asked the words, I said. Not exactly the words, but the question he meant. You lied? She asked. I lied. Good. She looked older. I'm aware that's a cliché. She looked older, but I mean it in the exact way. Truth sometimes hurts. The skin at her jaw had sagged overnight. The whites of her eyes were threaded with red. They don't like direction more than they don't like distance. The first time, they learn your voice. The second, they learn if you'll play. What are they? I asked, and hated that I sounded like a child asking about a thing under a bed. Hungry, she said, then softer, and patient. I showed her the coin. She held it in her palm for half a second and hissed, then dropped it back in the drawer like a hot pan. Throw it out, I said. She shook her head. It'll come back. Better to know where it is. She pushed the drawer shut. If anyone asks your way to Hollow Pines, you lie. If anyone asks how far, you lie. If anyone asks if you've seen the watchman, you nod and say you haven't. And if they ask you to show them the road, you look at the floor and say you can't leave the counter. The watchman, I repeated. She had said that name once before. A figure in a brown coat, passing the window. Not one of them, she'd said. Another rule that feels like a superstition until it doesn't. Keller rubbed her thumb and forefinger together as if the coin's cold had stayed in the skin. If you see him tonight, you nod. Always. He's part of the pact. What pact? I asked, though I knew the word already. I'd felt it in the pie case whispers, in the jukebox's song that kept playing with no power. I'd felt it when the road made a loop and asked me to pretend it was straight. The one that keeps the diner where the diner is, she said. The one that keeps you where you are until morning. I nodded. Not because I understood, but because understanding and nodding are cousins here, and one works even when the other doesn't. That night, just after dusk, I stood by the window with a bus tub of cups and watched the highway's thin ribbon behave itself. A man in a long brown coat walked along the shoulder, hat low, hands at his sides. He didn't slow when he reached the puddle of neon spilling from our sign. He didn't look in. He didn't need to. I nodded. He didn't nod back. He didn't have to. The greeting is a key you turn and never know which door it locks. By 11, the man with the flannel came back. He stood outside for a long time, before the bell gave one lonely tap. He didn't sit. He didn't eat. He stood at the counter and watched me count the pie slices with my lips moving. His pupils were still too still. How far? He said, the exact phrasing again. Like a test, he wanted to see if I remembered. I smiled as if we were two men passing time. Couple hours west. Right. He took a coin from his pocket and pressed it into my hand like a salesman sealing a deal with the world's coldest handshake. Hours later, when the drawer's teeth had rearranged themselves into another little grin, I realized something that makes my throat tighten even now. There aren't that many teeth a single man will lose without noticing, which means they aren't only his. That's when the highway began to fold. Not in the visually dramatic way a movie would do it. In small ways a tired person could ignore. A car passed twice, once with a cracked windshield, once without. A mile marker showed 19, and then, 5 minutes later, 19 again, as if the paint crew had been lazy. The tree line repeated its gaps. The road's hum came up through the diner's floor and sat in my ankles like a sleeping animal. I set the coin on top of the register and spoke into the room because that's the only way I know to make a thing feel less like it owns me. Rule 6, I said softly. If a stranger asks, how far to Hollow Pines, lie. Outside, the faceless edgemen did not appear. The void did not open. The jukebox stayed dead. The man at the counter did not show. It was only me and a coin and the knowledge that roads can learn your name the same way a jukebox can. At 2:58, the bell tapped twice. I didn't look. At 3:13, I didn't touch the door. At 3:18, I breathed all the way down to the bottom of my lungs for the first time in an hour. When dawn came, it was gray and a little pink, like a bruise healing. I took the coin out to the dumpster because I wanted to do a stupid human thing, a thing that asserts rules where there aren't any. I lifted the lid, dropped the coin into black plastic, and listened to it land. It made no sound. The bag swallowed it like water swallows a stone and refuses to ripple. Back inside, I opened the drawer to count out the morning bank. The coin was in its slot, wrong face up, teeth smiling wider than yesterday. I laughed once, a cracked sound. Some part of me, the part that held on to jokes as a way to not scream, said, "Fine. Stay, then." The rest of me wanted to pull my own teeth out to see if the drawer would trade them for direction. Keller came in and watched me close the drawer with both hands like it was a lid on something that boiled. "You lied when you had to," she said. "I did. You'll have to keep lying." She stared at the window, the road, the stand of pines that wasn't repeating itself in daylight. "Because if you tell the truth about this place, if you point it out on a map or say how close it is, you'll learn there's more than one way to arrive." I don't know what she meant by that exactly. I only know that all day, in the dead motel room with the rattling AC, I dreamed of an endless highway that loops back on itself until it tightens like a noose, and a man in a flannel jacket who smiles with a mouth full of borrowed teeth and asks me for directions in a voice that wears my name like a charm. That night, before my shift, I wrote the rules in my own hand on a napkin and tucked it in my pocket. It felt like a passport. It felt like a will. Never let a customer sit in booth #6. If the jukebox starts on its own, unplug it. The man at the counter after 2 a.m. isn't real. Do not serve him. Keep the pie case full. Never go outside 333 to the 17. If they ask the way to Hollow Pines, lie. I added one more line. Not from Keller, from me. If the road starts to repeat, don't look for where it begins. Look for where it refuses to end. It's not a rule, it's a prayer. Out here, they're almost the same thing. By my 8th night, the rules no longer felt like instructions on a laminated sheet. They felt like bars on a cage. The only thing between me and something too big, too old, too hungry. And Keller finally admitted why. She came in early that morning, long before dawn. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair frayed like she'd been yanking at it. She didn't order coffee, didn't scold me for the crooked pies in the case. She just sat at the counter with her hands folded. "You're still here," she said flatly. "Yeah," I muttered, against my better judgment. She smirked, a crack of humor that didn't reach her eyes. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something heavy. A stack of folders, papers, clippings. She slid them toward me like evidence in a trial. "You've earned the truth." The papers smelled like mildew and smoke. Some were yellowed with age, dates scrawled from the 1,920 seconds. Others were photocopies from the 70 seconds, 80 seconds, grainy pictures of missing faces. One headline caught my eye. 37 miners vanish in Hollow Pines collapse. No bodies recovered. "The mine," Keller said. Her voice dropped. "That's where it started. They dug too deep, opened something that should have stayed buried. The whole town knew it. They closed the shaft, sealed it with concrete, built over it. But it didn't stop." She jabbed a finger at the papers. First it was the mine, then the church that went up across the road, then the diner. Same land, same hunger. The rules came after. Not to stop it, nothing stops it, but to contain it, to bargain with it. I flipped through the clippings. Missing persons, disappearances, people swallowed by the woods, by the road, by the diner itself. Every decade, the same pattern, and always someone whispering about the watchman. I looked up. "Who is he?" Keller's jaw tightened. "He's not one of them," she said. "He's something else. A keeper. A warden. He makes sure we follow the pact. He doesn't save you. He doesn't help you. But if you nod, if you greet him, he keeps the balance." Her eyes cut to the window then, where the morning light smeared against the greasy glass. "Miss him once, and you'll wish the rules killed you faster." I felt the cold creep into my bones as I shuffled the papers back into a pile. "So that's it? We just keep playing along? Stock the pies? Lie to strangers? Pretend the counterman isn't real? That's our lives?" Keller's laugh was hollow. "You think anyone lives here by choice?" She tapped the rules on the wall. "These aren't traditions. They're chains. Every night is a negotiation. Break one, and the diner falls. And when the diner falls, so does the town." That night, when the shift began, I found myself watching the windows more than usual. Watching for him. The watchman, and sure enough, just past midnight, he appeared. A tall figure in a long brown coat, hat pulled low, boots crunching against gravel. His stride was slow, deliberate. He didn't look inside, didn't break step, just passed under the neon glow like a shadow stretched too long. I remembered Keller's words. Always nod when you see him. So I did. A small, tight nod. And I swear, just for a heartbeat, the shadow under his hat tilted in acknowledgement. After that, I stopped pretending the rules were about the diner. They weren't about pie or jukeboxes or booths. They were about feeding something old, just enough to keep it quiet. And I realized something I wish I hadn't. Sooner or later, the diner wouldn't be enough. There's a rhythm to the diner, as twisted as it is. The rules make it predictable. When the jukebox will stir, when the man at the counter will appear, when the air outside will thin into nothing. As long as you follow the script, you survive. But one stormy night, the rhythm broke. The rain came first, hard, punishing, slamming against the windows until it sounded like fists beating to get in. Lightning split the sky, and the power hiccuped. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed, flared, and then darkness. I stood frozen in the pitch black. The only sound was the rain, until the jukebox lit up like a carnival ride. Music blasted, not the warped country tune from before, but something jagged, frantic, like static and screams cut together. It was so loud I felt it in my teeth. I lunged for the cord, but it wasn't plugged in. The cord dangled, frayed at the tip. I grabbed it anyway, yanked like it would matter. The music didn't stop. Then came the pie case. I turned, and my stomach flipped. The shelves were bare. I'd stocked them less than an hour ago, but the glass sat empty, streaked with condensation. My hands shook as I ran to the kitchen, flinging open the freezer. Pies, dozens of them gone. Boxes collapsed and shredded, as if something had torn through them. Back out front, the shadows were already spilling from the booths, stretching like black tongues across the floor. The whispers rose in unison, guttural and furious. Feed us. But there was nothing left to give. The bell over the door chimed, though I hadn't heard it open. I spun. The man at the counter was there. Early. Too early. It was only 1:30, but he sat on his stool, dripping water from his coat, milky eyes fixed straight ahead. His lips curled into a grin, wide and sharp. "You're off schedule," I whispered, voice cracking. He didn't answer. He never did. But the smile spread further, splitting his pale face into something inhuman. The diner began to shake, not from the storm, but from something heavier, circling. Plates rattled, silverware clattered. The ceiling tiles groaned, like the roof might peel away. Keller burst through the back door, soaked and wild-eyed. "Barricade the windows," she shouted. Together we shoved tables, chairs, whatever we could against the glass. The neon sign outside flickered, sputtered, then died. Every surface trembled with the weight of something massive moving around us. And then, through the thunder and whispers, I heard it. The sound of leather squeaking, vinyl stretching. I turned toward booth #6. The cushions pulsed, swelled. Something pressed from beneath, straining against the seams. A shape rose in the glass of the window beside it, a dark silhouette trying to force its way in. And the man at the counter leaned forward, lips parting just enough to murmur, "Time's almost up." The storm swallowed the words, but they burned into me anyway. That was the night I realized the rules weren't guarantees. They were bargains. And bargains break. The diner didn't feel like the diner anymore. It felt like a throat, closing in, choking us both inside it. The storm outside hadn't let up, but the shaking wasn't thunder now, it was footsteps, circling, pressing down like a predator testing the strength of its prey. Keller leaned against the counter, bleeding from a gash on her forehead, her breath ragged. The jukebox screamed without sound, its lights pulsing in and out. Booth #6 bulged like a stomach trying to digest something too large. The pie case sat cracked, its glass splintered outward, empty shelves glowing faintly with a light that wasn't mine. And then she told me. "If the others fail," Keller rasped, gripping my wrist hard enough to bruise, "there's one more rule, the last one. Leave, and never come back." Keller. Her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with certainty. She'd lived through decades of this, but now even she sounded like a child confessing to the dark. "But how?" I stammered. "The roads. They'll try to keep you," she whispered. "They'll twist. They'll loop. They'll lie. Don't look back. Don't answer them. Just run." The diner groaned. The lights sputtered out, and the man at the counter was suddenly inches from me. No movement, no sound, just there. His milky eyes were clearer now, sharpened into points of pale fire. His grin widened, splitting his face like glass under pressure. I stumbled back, dragging Keller with me, but she shoved me toward the door. "Go!" she screamed. "While you still can." The door gave under my weight, and the storm swallowed me whole. The highway was no longer a highway. It looped, bent, folded back on itself like a snake eating its own tail. Headlights appeared, multiplied, smeared into red ribbons that circled me from every direction. The forest pressed in, the trees repeating like stuttering film frames. And everywhere I turned, the lamppost man stood, dozens of him, each at a different corner of the road, each with his head tilted at that sickening angle, each waiting. I ran. My backpack thumped against me, stuffed with the only proof I had. Napkins with the rules scrawled in my handwriting, scraps of Keller's old clippings, the laminated sheet that felt heavier than lead. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept running. The whispers followed. Voices called my name, sometimes in Keller's voice, sometimes in my own. Shadows brushed against me, fingers that never quite closed but always reached. And behind it all, the steady, deliberate knocking. Not on doors now, on the world itself. Knock, knock, knock. I found myself on a stretch of blacktop that stretched straight for once, the trees flanking me like walls. For the first time in what felt like hours, the looping broke. The road looked real. I kept running, praying with every step that I was free. Then the headlights appeared, bright, blinding, bearing down on me. I froze. The roar of an engine swallowed the knocking. My knees buckled. The lights filled everything. I pulled the recorder from my bag, thumb trembling on the button. My voice broke as I spoke into it, my last words before the light consumed me. If you're hearing this, don't ever stop at Hollow Pines Diner. Don't eat, don't drink, don't stay. Just keep driving. There are rules. Follow them. Or static swallowed the rest. The tape ends, but the faint sound of knocking continues. Slow, patient, endless.